You've arrived at CozySideAudio, where dreams begin with a story. Whether you're studying, journaling, or just chilling, this one's for you. If you vibe with this kind of content, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe for more.
CozySideAudio presents The World Where the Wind Never Stops. Chapter 1. The Sky That Never Stills. The wind never died anymore. It prowled between the skeletons of buildings, carrying dust, ash, and the bitter tang of ozone. Every sound came sharpened glass hissing as it shifted, loose metal shrieking against itself, the low moan of air squeezing through cracks. He'd learned the language of those sounds. The city didn't speak in words, but in warnings. High, sharp whistling meant distance. Low, guttural howls meant something close. Close meant run. Close meant maybe you made it, maybe you didn't. He crouched in the doorway of a half-collapsed diner, a hand pressed to the jagged edge of brick to steady himself. The horizon was black, not with night, but with boiling cloud. Lightning stitched through the storm wall, jagged scars of light splitting the sky from one end of the skyline to the other. It wasn't coming yet, not quite, but it would. They always came. He tugged the strap of his pack tighter. Inside, the weight was pitiful. A half-empty bottle of water, a few cans dented beyond recognition, a blanket stiff with mildew. Not enough. Never enough. His stomach had been clawing at itself for days now, but the storm was the priority. You could outlast hunger for a while. You couldn't outlast a funnel carving through the street you were standing on. He moved. The rhythm of survival was simple. Don't stay where the storm will want to go. And the storm wanted everywhere. The street ahead had become a canyon of glass and broken concrete. Skyscrapers leaned at angles, their windows smashed out years ago by winds that no architect had ever dreamed of. He picked his way through the debris, boots crunching on shattered rebar, eyes flicking constantly upward. The clouds swirled faster. Lightning tore through them again. Closer now, the air buzzing like it had teeth. His throat went dry. The sound was coming low, rolling, like the growl of something too big to see. He stopped in the middle of the road and closed his eyes for just a moment. The memory came unbidden. Another sky, years ago, the night the moon split. He'd been outside, on a balcony, staring at his phone while the feed filled with panic. At first it was just a crack across the moon's surface, like a fracture line in glass. Then it broke. Enormous chunks tearing away, scattering into orbit. He remembered the way the light changed the tide screaming against the shore. The air itself collapsing in on itself. He remembered calling his sister, remembered her voice breaking through static, telling him she was scared. And then, the wind snapped him back. He opened his eyes. The storm was advancing. He ducked into the husk of a convenience store, the shelves stripped bare long ago, the floor a carpet of wrappers and smashed cans. He didn't bother searching. Places like this were picked clean in the first year. Instead, he pressed deeper, finding a stairwell leading down. Basements were dangerous flood traps, collapse risks, but so was being in the open when the sky decided to hunt. The stairs creaked under his weight, and he hesitated at the bottom. The air smelled damp, sour. He could hear dripping, faintly, and something scurrying across tile. Not rats, those had mostly starved. Probably insects, or worse. He settled in the corner, pulling the blanket around himself, and waited. The storm roared above, rattling the bones of the city. It wasn't a tornado, not yet. Just a chain lightning squall. The kind that crawled over the skyline for hours before finally breaking. The thunder shook dust loose from the ceiling. He closed his eyes again. Not to sleep. Sleep was a luxury. And storms never allowed it. Just to rest. To drift. The memory clawed its way back anyway. His sister's voice, the last call, cut short by static and screaming wind. He tried to remember her face clearly, but every time he did, it blurred with lightning. The building shuddered. Something heavy collapsed upstairs. He snapped his eyes open, heart thudding in his chest. The wind was closer. A howl, deep and long, rolled through the concrete. He knew that sound. Not the storm front, the funnel. He shoved the blanket back into his pack and climbed the stairs 2 at a time, pulse hammering. The street outside was chaos, already debris dancing in small cyclones, windows imploding, sheets of metal slamming against walls. The horizon wasn't a horizon anymore. It was a wall of black, swirling, rotating, dragging the rest of the sky down with it. A funnel clawed from cloud to earth, thick as a tower, tearing its way through the city blocks. Lightning crawled up its sides like veins. Shit, he breathed, though there was no one to hear. He ran. The storm followed. Chapter 2. Echoes of a Sister. The city was gone by morning. Not leveled, not vanished, just different. That was what the storms did. They didn't erase. They rearranged. Where once there had been towers, now there were blackened stumps. Where streets had been, there was rubble, twisted steel, overturned trucks. The funnel had carved its path clean through, shifting the bones of the skyline until he barely recognized where he stood. He climbed over a slab of concrete that used to be a wall and looked out over the wasteland. The air still crackled faintly, alive with the charge left behind. Smoke curled up from somewhere distant, the smell of fire carried on the restless wind. This was what passed for calm. His legs ached from the night's running. He'd made it, he always did. Close enough to feel the storm's breath, far enough not to be claimed. It wasn't luck, not anymore. It was instinct. You survived long enough. You started to feel where the storm wanted to go. But instinct couldn't fill his stomach. He pushed onward, past the wreckage of what used to be a subway entrance. The stairs had collapsed inward, twisted railings reaching up like the bones of some buried giant. He remembered when people had thought those underground places would save them. He'd even tried it once, the first month after the moon split. The memory bit deep, as they always did. The tunnels had been crowded, stale air, candles burning low, people pressed shoulder to shoulder, waiting for something like rescue. The storms had pounded above for days, weeks, and the world had grown feral in the dark. Fights over water, food, the last batteries. He'd kept his back against the wall, hand on his knife, trying to believe it would hold. Then the flood came. A surge from the surface, water roaring down the stairwells, sweeping through the tunnels like a beast with no mercy. Screams, panic, the press of bodies clawing at him as the black water rose. He'd barely made it out. Alone. Always alone. He shook the memory loose with a growl and kept moving. The clouds were already bruising again, new storms building in the distance. They never stopped. The sky never cleared. You just had pockets of less danger between the walls of chaos. His boots carried him through a neighborhood of houses ripped open like dollhouses. Roofs gone, walls peeled away, furniture strewn across lawns that had long since turned to mud and gravel. He picked his way through, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Sometimes there were others here, survivors. But more often, They weren't survivors anymore, just husks that had forgotten what people were supposed to be. The kitchen of one wreck still had cabinets intact. He pried one open and found a box of cereal, swollen with moisture. He broke it open anyway, chewing the soggy handfuls without tasting them. It was fuel, that was all. When he closed his eyes, chewing, he saw her again. His sister. It had been the night of the shattering, the night everything split apart. He'd been staring at his phone screen, watching the moon come apart on live streams from around the world, but he'd called her anyway. She'd been in London then, a whole ocean away. Her voice had been thin with fear. It looks wrong. The sky looks wrong. Is it the same there? He'd told her yes, that it was the same, that it would pass, that someone would fix it. He'd lied because he couldn't do anything else. The line had gone dead when the first supercell had ripped across his city. He'd tried calling back again and again until the towers fell silent. He spit the last of the cereal dust from his mouth and pushed on. The memory was as dangerous as the storm itself. It slowed him down, distracted him. In this world, distraction killed. By afternoon, the sky was already roaring again. The horizon boiled black, funnel shapes twitching and fading inside the clouds like predators waiting to pounce. He dropped low, crawling into the skeleton of a school bus half buried in rubble. The glass was gone, the seats torn, but the steel cage might hold long enough. He settled in, pack at his side, eyes fixed on the storm wall advancing. The thunder rolled closer, louder, and the air thickened until every breath tasted of metal. He closed his eyes again, not to rest, but to hide from the images that always clawed at him when the storm came close. Her face again. His sister. Always her. Her voice breaking into static. Stay with me, okay? Just stay on the line. The sound of rushing wind had swallowed her words. And then nothing. He opened his eyes as the first lightning bolt ripped the sky apart. The storm was here. Chapter 3. Hunger is louder than fear. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was worse. I crouched inside the husk of an overturned bus, watching the gray daylight seep through the cracks in its twisted frame. The air still smelled of ozone and wet metal. My ears rang faintly, a leftover hum from the lightning strike that had gutted the street last night. My stomach growled loud enough to make me flinch. I pressed my hand against it, like that would quiet the noise, like I could fool myself into forgetting the last time I'd eaten was 2 days ago. Hunger makes you reckless, makes you ignore the rules you've carved into your bones about survival. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The building across the street looked promising, or at least less collapsed than most. An old convenience store, its sign half torn away, letters spelling nothing but nonsense. The windows were gone, jagged glass glittering on the wet ground like teeth. I gripped the length of pipe I carried, slid from the bus's shadow, and crossed the broken street. My boots splashed through shallow water, each step louder than I wanted it to be. I hated how exposed it felt out here, hated the open sky pressing down, hated the way every gust of wind carried the whisper of another funnel dropping. The door gave after a shove, scraping across the floor. The sound echoed through the hollow space. I froze, listening. Only the drip of water from a hole in the ceiling answered me. Inside smelled of mildew and rot. Shelves sagged under the weight of time and storms. I moved carefully, eyes searching for anything intact. Most of the packaging was swollen with water damage. Cardboard turned to pulp, cans rusted through. Then, salvation. A tin wedged behind a collapsed shelf, still sealed, the label worn, unreadable. My hands trembled as I pried it free, teeth grit against the sharp squeal of metal on metal. My pulse hammered. I listened again. Nothing. I sank onto the floor, pulled out my knife, and stabbed the can open. The contents didn't matter. Dog food, beans, something worse. I didn't care. Hunger drowned out disgust. I scooped the wet paste into my mouth with my fingers, barely chewing, swallowing so fast it hurt. For a moment, the world shrank to nothing but food and the relief that came with it. Then I heard it. A sound from deeper in the store, a shuffle. Not the building settling, not wind. Something else. I froze mid-bite, throat tight, hands slick with whatever I was eating. My stomach growled again, cruel and demanding. But my ears, my instincts, knew better. Hunger had lured me in. And now fear reminded me why scavenging always carried a cost. Chapter 4. The things that live below. The sound didn't belong to the building. I knew the difference. Wood groans, metal shifts. Rain finds its rhythm on hollow walls. But this was footsteps, careful ones. I tightened my grip on the pipe, every muscle in my body locking into stillness. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, but I kept my breathing shallow, steady. Hunger could drive you to risk a lot, but I hadn't survived this long by ignoring my gut. Something, or someone, was in here with me. I backed toward the broken door as slowly as I could, boots scraping lightly against the damp concrete. Another sound followed, faint but distinct, a scrape of fabric brushing against wood. Not an animal. Not unless the storms had made something new again. The thought didn't help. I slipped out into the rain, cold mist clinging to my face. Outside, the streets seemed almost welcoming in comparison. At least, out there, I could see. I didn't look back, not yet. My pack was heavy, food pressing against my spine with every step. But I kept moving. By the time I reached the edge of the block, curiosity dragged my eyes over my shoulder. The warehouse door had shifted, just slightly, enough that the warped metal didn't catch the way it had when I left. Someone was definitely inside. I kept walking. The city beyond spread like a maze of half-drowned bones. Buildings leaned against each other for support, glassless windows staring down like empty sockets. Vines crept along brick and steel, twisting into grotesque patterns, half nature, half ruin. The rain had turned alleys into rivers, slick with oil that shimmered faintly under the dim sky. I headed south, drawn by the thought of a higher ground. The lower streets stank of rot. Too many places where water pooled, where things grew that shouldn't, where shadows never dried. The higher blocks weren't safer, not exactly, but at least they felt less claustrophobic. That was when I heard it again, this time below me. A muffled sound, like stone grinding on stone, carried up through the cracks in the pavement. I froze, scanning the ruined street. The ground here was fractured, patches of concrete missing altogether, revealing black voids beneath. And from those voids came a different sound. Breathing. Slow, ragged, inhuman. The hairs on my arms lifted. I edged backward until my boot caught a loose rock and sent it skittering across the ground. The breathing stopped. Then something shifted in the dark below, scraping against the broken concrete edges, pulling itself closer to the surface. I didn't wait. I bolted, every step splashing through shallow puddles, lungs burning as the weight of the pack dragged me down. The sound followed. Heavy, wet impacts from somewhere beneath, as though the thing was trying to keep pace just under the street. I didn't dare look down again. Didn't want to see what was chasing me from beneath the world. I ran until the road bent sharply upward, the cracked slope leading toward a cluster of skeletal towers. Only when the noise faded, swallowed by the endless patter of rain, did I finally slow. My chest heaved, my throat burned. The city wasn't empty. Not above, not below. And if hunger had nearly driven me into the hands of whatever lived under those streets, then fear wasn't going to keep me alive. It was only going to make me hesitate. And hesitation out here meant death. Chapter 5. Tornado Alley Reborn. The wind carried a low moan through the hollow streets. It was the kind of sound that put your teeth on edge, like the world was inhaling before it screamed. I crouched at the edge of a collapsed overpass, eyes on the black horizon where clouds churned in slow, violent spirals. Tornado weather. I'd learned to read it the way people used to read calendars. The thickness in the air, the taste of metal on my tongue, the way birds went silent, and even the rats disappeared underground. The sky over the ruins was a bruise, colors layered in ugly streaks, sickly green bleeding into gray, then black. Fingers of cloud twisted downward, testing the air, retreating, forming again. The storm was deciding where to touch down. And I was in the middle of its playground. I pulled my pack tight against my back, checked the straps twice, then moved fast down the broken highway. My boots splashed through puddles, soles sliding on algae-slick concrete. Every gust shoved me sideways, making balance feel like a fight. I passed the carcasses of cars, stripped to frames, their paint long since scoured away by years of storms. Some still had bones inside. The wind whistled through their empty windows, like ghosts still screaming to get out. When the first funnel touched down, the sound ripped the world in half. A roar, deeper than anything a human throat could make. It rattled in my chest, shook water loose from the street, peeled metal from bent road signs. I didn't look back. Looking back was how you died. I ran. The funnel's shadow swept across the ruins, blotting out what little light made it through the clouds. My legs pumped, lungs tearing, heart threatening to give out. I veered into a side street, hoping the jagged teeth of half-standing buildings would break the storm's hunger for me. The air turned solid. Pressure shoved me to my knees, ears popping, skin stinging like it was being pricked by thousands of needles. My vision blurred. I forced myself up, shoved into the nearest building through a shattered doorway. Inside was worse. The wind shrieked through every crack, rattling debris, shaking dust down from the rafters. Windows exploded inward, glass slicing across my jacket, a thin cut opening on my cheek. The storm was trying to reach me, to pull me out. I dropped to the floor, crawling behind a heavy counter that had been bolted to the ground long before the world ended. I curled there, pack still strapped on, head pressed against the filthy tiles. The roar grew until it was all I could hear. Every memory I'd tried to bury ripped itself open. My sister's voice on the phone, panicked, a half-world away. The newscaster's calm words breaking apart as the feed cut out. The sound of my father's house crumbling under the first tornado that had touched down in our town. The screams. The silence after. I gritted my teeth, dug my fingers into the counter's rusted edge, and waited. The building shuddered, beams snapping, dust choking my throat. For one endless minute, I thought this was it, that the storm had finally decided my number was up. Then, as fast as it had come, the roar drifted north. The pressure lifted. The counter stopped trembling beneath my hands. Silence crept back, broken only by the rain hammering the roof in its endless rhythm. I waited another 10 minutes before I moved. That was the rule. Never trust a storm to be finished just because it's quiet. When I finally stood, my knees shook so bad I had to brace against the wall. Through the broken doorway, I could see the funnel dancing farther off, chewing through another part of the city. The old maps had called this region Tornado Alley. But that was before the shattered moon. Now, the whole world was Tornado Alley, and I was running out of places to hide. Chapter 6. Debris from the sky. The sound woke me before the light did. A faint hiss, like sand pouring through a sieve. It threaded through my half-dreams until instinct shoved me upright. My pack was already clutched to my chest, pipe in my grip. Then came the crash. Something huge ripped through the clouds above, trailing fire like a wound in the sky. The impact landed blocks away, rattling the bones of the city. Dust puffed through the cracks in the ceiling, coating my tongue with grit. Moonfall. Chunks of the shattered moon still found their way down here, years after the first collision. Some small enough to burn up before touching ground, others big enough to erase entire districts in a heartbeat. The debris field was constant, like the world was bleeding from above. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, ears tuned to the groan of a building about to give. This one wasn't safe anymore, not with tremors rolling through its frame. I grabbed what little I had, shoved it into the pack, and bolted. The street outside was chaos. Smoke rose in oily columns, mixing with the storm clouds until sky and earth looked like one endless bruise. The impact site glowed faintly to the east, painting broken glass in hues of red and gold. And with it came another sound, smaller, sharper. Plinks, whistles, like hail. I glanced up and my blood ran cold. Fragments were still falling, streaking down in burning arcs, some no bigger than fists, others the size of cars. They punched through rooftops, smashed into streets, left craters that steamed as rain tried to smother the heat. I sprinted, every step a gamble. Shards hissed past me, the air searing where they cut. One slammed into the pavement yards ahead, exploding into chunks that peppered my jacket and knocked me onto my side. The heat scorched the concrete beneath my palms. I forced myself up, legs screaming, lungs clawing for air. Ran again. This wasn't like the storms. You couldn't read debris, couldn't smell it in the air or hear its approach until it was too late. It was random, blind. A god dropping stones on ants. Another crash split the air. This one so close, the shockwave sent glass skittering down from the ruins above me. My ears rang, vision shaking. I ducked into the nearest intact doorway, heart hammering, hands still trembling around the pipe. Inside was darkness and mildew. The floor tilted, water pooling in the lowest corner. A stairwell yawned downward, flooded to the second step. I didn't care. It was shelter. I collapsed against the wall, forcing myself to breathe. The rain outside kept sizzling as debris hit water. For long minutes, that was all there was, the constant hiss, the sharp plinks, the distant rumbles of new impacts. Only when silence crept back in did I realize how raw my throat felt, how badly my legs shook, My body wanted rest. My mind wouldn't let me. Because this wasn't over. The storms hunted you. But the sky itself. The sky wanted to kill you by accident. Chapter 7, A City of Bones. Morning didn't mean light anymore. The clouds pressed down so low that the skyline blurred, towers dissolving into the gray like ribs into fog. The world was dim, heavy, and endless. I walked anyway. I always walked. The city shifted as I moved deeper, as if it had been sculpted by storms into something unrecognizable. Skyscrapers leaned against each other like drunks too tired to fall. Entire blocks had caved in, swallowed by sinkholes or chewed apart by tornadoes. Rusted rebar jutted upward like spines. And everywhere, bones. Some bleached white by years of rain, others half sunk into mud, others still charred black by lightning strikes. They weren't just human. Dogs, cattle, something that might have been a bear. Whole streets became graveyards where storm funnels had swept life into piles and left it there to rot. I tried not to look, but it was impossible not to. One skeleton sat upright against a lamppost, ribs poking through a shredded jacket, jaw frozen mid-scream. Another was tangled in a collapsed fire escape, skull split open where falling steel had crushed it. I tightened the straps of my pack and kept moving, jaw clenched. The further I went, the stranger it got. A funnel must have carved straight through here years ago and left the imprint of its path behind. Buildings bent in the same direction, glassless windows facing east as though still caught in the wind. Cars were stacked on top of each other in neat rows, metal twisted but organized, as if some giant hand had played with them. At the center of it all was a courtyard. And in the courtyard stood something I couldn't explain. A mound of bones. Piled high, taller than me, wider than any grave pit I'd seen. Skulls grinned down from the top, empty sockets staring skyward. Some still had bits of hair clinging to them. Others bore cracks, burn marks, or jagged edges where teeth had been knocked loose. I swallowed bile. My stomach turned so hard I almost doubled over. This wasn't nature. This was deliberate. Someone had built this. I backed away, boots scraping on wet stone. My shoulders brushed against a wall, and I froze, pipe raised. No sound, just rain dripping from broken gutters. But the mound felt wrong, like it was watching me. I circled wide, every nerve in my body alive, forcing myself not to sprint. Sprinting made noise. Sprinting drew attention. By the time I reached the far end of the courtyard, my chest was tight with the effort of holding myself steady. The mound was still there, silent, waiting. I turned my back on it and kept walking. Some things out here were too big to fight. Some things you just survived by not asking questions. But even as the rain softened, even as the storm winds shifted elsewhere, the image clung to me. The city wasn't just full of bones. It was made of them. And maybe I was walking through someone else's idea of a warning. Chapter 8, The Man Who Doesn't Speak. I saw him first in the reflection of a broken window. A figure moving through the ruins, steady, deliberate. His outline flickered in the shattered glass, fractured into pieces that didn't quite line up. My pulse jumped. For a second, I thought it was another hallucination, my brain's way of stitching ghosts out of shadows. But when I turned, he was there. Tall, thin, wrapped in rags layered so thick it was impossible to tell what was flesh and what was cloth. His head was hooded, face shadowed. but I could see his eyes. Gray, empty, like storm clouds pressed into sockets. He didn't speak, didn't gesture, didn't even flinch when the wind rattled the debris around us. I gripped my pipe tighter. "You following me?" My voice cracked, too loud in the open street. Nothing. He just stood there, staring. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. My stomach churned. I backed a step, boots crunching over glass. His gaze followed the sound like a predator tracking prey. I forced myself not to bolt. Running in open space was suicide. "Fine," I muttered. "Stay where you are. Works for me." I turned down an alley, shoulders tight, every nerve screaming. I listened for his steps behind me. Nothing. Just the steady hammer of rain. But when I glanced back, he was there. Closer this time. I stopped breathing. The alley spun in the corners of my vision. I wanted to scream at him, to demand he say something, anything. But the words stuck. Fear was a weight pressing down on my lungs. Instead, I forced my legs to move, fast but not panicked, slipping between collapsed fences and broken door frames until the city swallowed me again. I ducked into a gutted laundromat, crouched low, pipe raised. Minutes crawled past. The only sound was the slow drip of water through a hole in the roof. Then, movement. Through the jagged mouth of the doorway, I saw him again, standing in the rain, motionless, watching. He didn't step closer, didn't try to follow inside, just stood there, as though he knew I couldn't leave until he did. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. My mind flashed with old warnings. Scavenger traps, raiders who used silence as bait, men who pretended madness to lure the desperate in. But something about him was different. He wasn't armed. He wasn't signaling anyone. He just waited. Finally, he turned, walked back into the rain. His silhouette vanished into the gray, piece by piece, until he was gone. I stayed where I was long after. Not because I thought he might return, but because I wasn't sure if I wanted him to. Chapter 9. The Long Walk. The storm had passed, but it left the world looking like something half-remembered from a fever. The streets stretched ahead in broken seams, asphalt peeled up like torn scabs, telephone poles leaning at angles that mocked geometry. There was no straight line anymore, no clear horizon, just endless wreckage, bending the eye into confusion. We walked. Our shadows dragged long and thin against the fractured ground. Nobody said much. Talking had become another kind of hunger, burning calories we didn't have to spare. The rhythm of our steps was its own conversation. Shuffle, scrape, pause. Every few minutes someone coughed, or spat dust, or stopped to tighten the straps on shoes that weren't meant for this kind of distance. The silence didn't mean peace. Fear clung to us like a second skin. Even when the sky was clear, we all kept glancing upward, waiting for the air to rupture again. Raphael broke the quiet first. 2 days without food, maybe 3, depending how you count. I'm starting to forget what a plate looks like. His voice was cracked leather, low, meant more for himself than us. "You're not the only one," Naomi said. She had circles under her eyes deep enough to look bruised. My stomach's loud enough to get us caught. "By who?" Jordan asked. He had the look of someone who would rather believe no one else was out here. "It's just us, and whatever keeps throwing the sky down on our heads." But even he didn't sound sure. The road sloped into what used to be an industrial district. Factories stood like rib cages stripped of meat, skeletal frames twisted and rusted. The wind whistled through holes in their walls, carrying the sour stink of chemicals long spilled. I kept expecting to see someone, or something, moving in that maze of shadows. We stopped for a break near what might have been a loading dock. The concrete was cracked, weeds forcing their way through, but it was flat enough to sit without fear of rolling an ankle. My legs shook when I lowered myself down. Naomi rubbed her knees, wincing. Feels like walking on glass. Raphael pointed toward the far side of the ruins. If the map's worth anything, there's a river about 8 miles ahead. Maybe the water's not poison yet. That's a lot of maybes. I said it sharper than I meant to, but exhaustion had stripped the varnish from all of us. No one argued. The break didn't last long. Rest just gave the body time to remember how much it hurt. So we pushed forward, crossing through the ribs of old industry, past rusted trucks and machines too big to imagine alive. That was when we saw them. A line of footprints, human, fresh, pressed deep into the mud left by the storm. They led east, away from the main road. Naomi knelt beside them, fingers hovering just above the impressions. More than one, she whispered. Maybe 5, maybe 6, and heavy. Jordan's face went pale. So we're not alone. Raphael's eyes narrowed, calculating. Could be good, could be bad. Depends on what they've got left to lose. I didn't like it. The prints meant people, but they also meant choices. Choices that could end with us stripped of everything we carried. Our knives, our water, our lives. But the alternative was just as sharp. Keep walking blind, praying the world offered us something before our bodies gave out. The group looked at me. Somehow I'd become the one who decided things. Maybe because I still bothered to think past the next mile. I swallowed hard. We follow, but slow, careful. If they're alive, they've found something that works. And if not, I didn't finish. I didn't need to. So we followed. The prints pulled us deeper into the skeleton of the city, where the buildings grew taller, leaning together like conspirators. Shadows pooled thick between them. Every sound carried too far. The scuff of a shoe, the rattle of loose metal, the whisper of breath. At one point, Naomi stopped, head tilted. You hear that? I strained my ears. Faint, almost imagined. The echo of voices. Laughter, quick and sharp, like glass breaking, then gone. The prints led us into an underpass where the concrete walls were painted with old graffiti. Half the words were faded into nonsense, but some glared out in jagged colors. Eat, run, hide. We kept moving. The underpass opened into a stretch of collapsed highway. The prints scattered here. Boot marks lost in rubble and dust. We searched, but they vanished like smoke. Naomi sagged against the wall. Now what? Raphael scanned the horizon. We keep walking. That's all there is. The words tasted like ash, but he wasn't wrong. So we set our faces forward again, feet dragging against the cracked bones of the road, while the world watched us with hollow eyes. The long walk stretched on, endless, hungry, waiting to see which one of us would stumble first. Chapter 10. A False Shelter. By the time we saw the building, our bodies had become machines for pain. Every step was a negotiation, with muscles that wanted nothing more than to collapse. Our mouths were dry, lips cracked and bleeding, our packs lighter than air because there was nothing left in them. So when the shape rose against the horizon, brick walls mostly intact, windows barred but unbroken, it didn't look like ruin. It looked like mercy. Naomi was the first to whisper it. "Shelter." Her voice trembled with something dangerously close to hope. We approached as if afraid it would vanish if we stared too long. The building stood alone. An old civic center, maybe, its doors chained shut, its roof mostly whole. Compared to the bones of everything else around us, it looked alive. Jordan circled the front, testing the chains with his hands. "Could cut through," he muttered, "if we had anything sharp enough." "Windows," Raphael said. He pointed to a smaller one near the side, glass fogged with grime. He picked up a rock and hurled it. The shatter rang out like a gunshot. We froze, listening. Nothing answered. The silence gave us courage. One by one, we climbed through, scraping arms and legs against the jagged edges. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with dust, but safe from the endless wind. For the first time in days, we exhaled. The room we entered looked like it once hosted community meetings, a circle of metal chairs stacked against the wall, faded posters peeling off bulletin boards. The kind of place where people might have gathered to argue about zoning laws or bake sales. The normalcy of it hurt. Naomi sat hard on the floor, back against the wall. "I don't care what's in here. I'm sleeping." But none of us slept right away. Instead, we explored. The building was bigger than it looked, with hallways that stretched into shadows, doors that creaked open to reveal offices, storage closets, restrooms. We moved slow, flashlights weak, but enough to carve shapes from the dark. And that was when the unease began. The first room I opened still held chairs set neatly around a long table. Papers were scattered across it, brittle with age. But some weren't. Some looked fresh, white, untouched by dust. I touched one, blank, but the edges curled inward, as if recently handled. Down another hallway, Raphael found blankets piled in a corner. They weren't new, but they weren't rotten either. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. When we regrouped, Naomi's eyes were wide, bloodshot. "This place isn't empty." Jordan tried to laugh, but it cracked. "So what? Maybe they left. Maybe they'll come back, and we can..." Or maybe they never left. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy air. The silence thickened. We decided, without really deciding, to stay only in the front room. Better to have walls at our back than corridors swallowing us. Raphael set the broken chairs against the door we'd climbed through. A sad barricade, but something. We lay down on the cold floor, heads pressed against packs that carried nothing but air. For a while, sleep teased us. My eyes blurred, my thoughts loosened. But then a sound. Soft, steady, like footsteps, far down the hall. I sat up, pulse hammering. Naomi was already awake, staring toward the dark mouth of the corridor. She mouthed the word. "Hear it?" "Yes." The steps went on for a while, then stopped. A pause that lasted too long. Long enough to know we weren't imagining it. Raphael gripped the handle of his knife, knuckles white. Jordan pressed his back against the wall, muttering curses under his breath. The air grew colder. My breath fogged. The building seemed to listen with us, every beam and brick holding its breath. Then, as sudden as they started, the steps retreated. The sound dissolved into silence again. We didn't move, didn't speak. We just sat there, waiting for something else to come. but nothing did. When morning crept through the filthy windows, our eyes were red and raw, our bodies stiff from holding still all night. None of us had truly slept. Naomi stood, shaking. "False shelter," she said flatly. "It's worse than nothing." Raphael kicked the barricade away. "Then we keep walking." And so we did, stepping back into the daylight, leaving the building behind like a wound we didn't dare reopen. But even as we put distance between us and those dark hallways, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't been alone. And that whatever lived there now knew our faces. Chapter 11. Lightning Chains. The sky began changing before we even noticed. At first, it was just a shift in the air, the way the wind started carrying grit that stuck between your teeth. Then the clouds thickened, boiling masses rolling on themselves, pressing lower until they seemed close enough to touch. The daylight dimmed into a sickly gray-green, the kind of color that feels wrong in your bones. We'd all seen storms, of course. We lived in them, but this was different. Naomi stopped walking and tilted her face upward. "Do you hear that?" I did. A low, buzzing hum, like static swelling in the air. The hairs on my arms lifted. My breath carried sparks when I exhaled. Then the first bolt came down. It didn't strike the ground so much as tear through it. A white-hot pillar slammed into the dirt half a mile away, blasting earth into the sky like shrapnel. The sound followed an instant later, not thunder, but something harsher, like steel tearing apart. And then another bolt, and another. They weren't random. They came in lines, chains of lightning leaping from one strike to the next, crawling across the horizon like veins of fire. Each one closer, each one louder. "Move," Raphael shouted. We ran, though there was nowhere to run to. The fields around us were open, flat, dotted only with the skeletal remains of barns long since shredded by tornadoes. No ditches, no cover, just the electric fury of the sky overhead. The lightning found an old tractor, half buried in weeds. The strike blew it apart in a spray of rust and molten shards. Naomi screamed as a piece of smoking metal clanged into the ground yards from her. Jordan grabbed her arm, dragging her forward. "Keep moving." But the storm wasn't chasing. It was circling. The bolts leapt ahead of us, behind us, to our left and right, boxing us in with a cage of white fire. Each chain strike seemed deliberate, like it had intent. I could taste copper. My tongue buzzed in my mouth. The four of us dove into the only cover we could see, a collapsed farmhouse, its roof half caved in, walls leaning at impossible angles. We scrambled beneath the jagged beams, crouching low, praying the storm would miss us. The world outside became pure light. Strike after strike hammered the earth, the air filling with the reek of ozone and burning soil. The sound was endless, deafening, a constant shriek that turned my thoughts into static. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it didn't help. The noise was inside me, rattling my ribs. My vision pulsed with each flash. Naomi curled beside me, hands over her head, whispering something again and again. I couldn't tell if it was prayer or madness. Raphael's lips moved in silence, counting maybe, the rhythm keeping him anchored. Jordan kept glancing at the gaps in the walls like he expected someone, or something, to crawl through. One bolt hit so close, it felt like the farmhouse lifted an inch off its foundation. A beam above us cracked, dropping dust into our hair. For a moment I thought the whole structure would collapse and bury us alive. But then, Silence. Not peace. Silence. The air felt scraped raw, emptied of sound. My ears rang. My heart didn't trust the quiet. We waited. A minute. 2. Long enough that the shadows lengthened again and the world settled back into the ruined calm we knew so well. When we finally crawled out, the field was unrecognizable. Blackened scars streaked across the dirt where the chains had burned paths. Smoke rose from dozens of smoldering craters. The tractor was gone, just molten puddles, cooling in the breeze. Naomi stood unsteady, her hair frizzed wild from static. She was crying, though her face showed no expression, just tears running unchecked. Jordan whispered, "It wanted us." No one argued. Because in this world, storms weren't just weather anymore. They were hunters. And that night, as we trudged on in silence, the image of those chained strikes haunted me. Lines of fire crawling toward us with purpose. As if the sky itself had learned our names. Chapter 12. The Woman in the Rubble. The storm had spent itself, but its aftermath clung to us like smoke. The lightning chains left behind a charred landscape that smelled of iron and ash. And every step we took through it sounded wrong, like we were trespassing across the grave of something ancient. We were half dead already. My body felt hollowed out, as if the bolts had burned more than the earth. I couldn't stop hearing the thunder in my skull, even though the sky was quiet now. We moved like ghosts through what used to be a town. The place had no name anymore. The signs were torn down, buildings gutted, windows smashed by years of winds that never stopped hammering. All that remained were foundations, scraps of walls, and skeletons of things people once believed permanent. It was Naomi who spotted the smoke. Thin, faint, rising from behind a wall that leaned like a broken jawbone. "Not storm smoke," she whispered. "Something else." Raphael shook his head, eyes darting to the sky. Could be survivors. Could be worse. We argued without words. Hunger and exhaustion made us reckless, but the memory of the footsteps in the false shelter made us cautious too. In the end, curiosity won. Curiosity always does. We followed the smoke through the debris, our boots crunching glass and gravel. Every turn revealed more ruin. Overturned cars rusted into hollow shells, toys buried under drifts of dirt, walls painted with streaks of mold. The source was a fire. Small, contained in a makeshift pit of stone. The smoke curled into the sky like a signal, but no one stood beside it. Jordan bent low, poking the coals with a stick. "Still warm," he muttered. "Someone's close." And then we heard it. A cry, thin, pained, coming from beneath the wreckage of a collapsed building across the street. We froze, exchanging looks heavy with dread. Could have been a trap. Could have been worse than a trap. But the sound came again, and this time it wasn't distant. It was human. Naomi broke first, running across the street. We followed. The building had been a grocery store once. Its roof was gone, its walls shattered inward like teeth knocked from a mouth. Beneath a pile of twisted rebar and bricks, a hand stuck out, fingers pale, trembling. "Help," the voice rasped, a woman's voice. We threw ourselves at the wreckage, lifting, pulling, scraping our hands raw against rusted metal. Every piece we shifted made the rubble groan, threatening to collapse further. The smell of dust and mildew filled our noses, choking us. Finally, we uncovered her. She couldn't have been more than 26, 27, younger than me. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood, her hair matted, but her eyes were alive, wide, fever-bright, locked on us with desperation. Her right ankle bent at an angle that made my stomach twist. "Please," she whispered. "I can't move." Naomi dropped to her knees, reaching for her hand. "We've got you," she said, voice breaking. "We'll get you out." The woman looked at Naomi, then at me. Her gaze lingered, searching, as if she were seeing something else in my face, something familiar. And in that moment, a memory slammed into me. My sister, standing in the doorway of our old house, laughing as she waved goodbye before leaving for her job overseas. That was the last time I'd seen her, the day before the storm started. This stranger's eyes were the same, the tilt of her chin, even the way she pressed her lips together against the pane. It wasn't her. I knew it wasn't. But the resemblance cut through me like glass. "Don't leave me here," she begged. And just like that, the decision was made. We weren't going to leave her, even if it killed us. Chapter 13. Dead Weight. The first thing I realized, once the dust settled and the adrenaline burned out, was that she couldn't walk. The woman, she still hadn't told me her name, lay on the floor of the gutted store, ankles swollen and purple, her face pale from the effort of not screaming when we moved her. Naomi tried to improvise a splint from wood and cloth, but it was like tying bandages on a broken pillar. The bones weren't right. Every time we shifted her, she gasped, and the sound carved into me like guilt. Naomi wanted to stay. Raphael and Jordan argued about leaving. The debate turned sharp, words hissing like knives, until finally the others did what people do best in this world. They cut themselves loose. They left us. No shouting, no final goodbyes. Just the rustle of packs, the crunch of boots fading into the distance. Naomi's face crumpled when she realized they weren't coming back. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just watched the shadows swallow them. And when the silence returned, it was absolute. That was how it became just me and her. She tried to sit up that night, gritting her teeth, sweat streaking the dirt on her cheeks. "Go after them," she rasped. Her voice cracked like old wood. Don't waste yourself here." I shook my head. Her eyes flared with something like anger, something like disbelief. "You don't even know me." No, I didn't. But I couldn't leave. Not when she looked so much like my sister. Not when she sounded like her too. Clipped words, stubborn in the face of fear. That resemblance haunted me more than hunger or lightning or the endless storm. "I'm not leaving," I said. Her mouth tightened. Maybe she wanted to argue more. Maybe she didn't have the strength. Either way, she slumped back down, breathing shallow. We slept in shifts, though sleep was a word stretched too thin to fit what actually happened. I dozed with my head against the crumbling wall, every creak of the ruins reminding me that the building could collapse again. Outside, the wind hissed through the skeleton of the town, carrying the distant groans of shifting debris. Sometimes I swore I heard voices in it. By dawn, the woman's face was waxy, her lips dry. She needed water, food, things I didn't have. That was the second realization. She wasn't just wounded. She was a burden. And burdens don't last long out here. Dragging her out of the store was hell. I fashioned a sling from the straps of my pack, threading it under her arms, hauling her inch by inch across broken glass and chunks of cement. She tried to help, tried to push with her good leg, but every move sent fire through her ankle and left her gasping. It took hours to clear a few blocks, hours of sweat stinging my eyes, muscles locking in protest, my throat burning with thirst. The sky above watched like an executioner, clouds moving in slow spirals that promised another round of punishment soon. By midday, I had to stop. I propped her against the shell of a car, both of us trembling. "This won't work," she whispered. Her eyes flicked to me, fierce despite the weakness in her body. "You'll die hauling me. Leave me." I swallowed, my tongue thick and useless. "Not happening." She laughed then, dry, bitter. "You're insane." "Maybe." But the image of my sister leaving, the wave I never got to return, was welded to my skull. Walking away now would mean reliving that moment forever. I chose the wait, even if it killed me. By the second day, I'd scavenged a piece of corrugated metal, bent it into a makeshift sled. I tied it with rope stripped from curtains in a half-toppled house, lashed her onto it, and pulled. The noise it made scraping across asphalt was unbearable, like dragging chains behind us. It announced our location to anyone or anything listening. Every step forward was a calculation. How far before the storms turned? How much energy left in my legs before they gave out? Every answer came back the same. Not enough. She watched me constantly, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with suspicion, sometimes with a hollow look that made me wonder if she'd already decided we were dead. The second night, we huddled inside a gutted diner, the roof sagging, the air thick with mildew. I lit no fire, couldn't risk the smoke. She leaned against the wall, shivering, biting her lip against the pain. I finally asked, "What's your name?" She hesitated. For so long I thought she'd refuse. Then, "Mara. Mara." The syllables hit me hard. Not my sister's name, but close enough to echo it. I repeated it under my breath, tasting the weight of it. Mara. She must have seen something in my expression, because she frowned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." A lie, but I was already choking on too many truths. The storms found us again on the third day. We were crossing what had once been a playground, the rusted skeleton of a slide jutting from the dirt like a snapped spine. When the wind shifted, the clouds funneled, lowering, twisting. I dropped the rope and scanned the horizon, my stomach dropping. A tornado, thin but fast, unfurling from the clouds like a whip. Its tail dragged across the earth, throwing dust and debris in wild spirals. Mara's eyes widened. "Go! No!" I grabbed the rope, hauling the sled with everything I had. My lungs burned, my arms screamed. The funnel roared closer, chewing through what little remained of the town. We reached a drainage pipe half buried in the earth. I shoved the sled toward it, yanked Mara inside, then crawled in after her. The pipe stank of rot and wet rust, but it was cover. The tornado hit minutes later. The sound wasn't wind. It was a living thing. A roar layered with shrieks and groans, the voices of the dead screaming through steel lungs. The pipe shuddered, dust blasting down the shaft, the world outside breaking apart piece by piece. I pressed myself over Mara, shielding her with my body, as if that would matter. She buried her face against my chest. For the first time, I felt her shaking not from pain, but from pure terror. And in that closeness, I realized something I hadn't let myself think before. She was mine to protect now. Not because she asked, not because she deserved it more than anyone else, but because I couldn't live with another ghost. When the tornado passed, the pipe was half collapsed, blocked on one end by rubble. We were sealed in except for the entrance we came through. Crawling back into daylight felt like rebirth, though the sky above promised no reprieve. The clouds were already churning again. Mara coughed, pulling the filthy blanket tighter around herself. Her voice was hoarse. "Dead weight," she muttered. I didn't argue. She was right. But she was mine now, and I'd carry that weight until the storms finally tore me apart. Chapter 14. A Sister's Shadow. The woman walked differently now. Even with her limp, even with the uneven weight she carried on her shoulders, she moved as though something unseen pressed her spine straighter, pulled her chin upward. Survival had burned her hollow in the first days I found her. But now, something else lived in her. Something that didn't match her fragile body. I only understood it slowly. Not in the way she scavenged quietly beside me, or how she drank from the cracked canteen as though rationing wasn't habit but ritual. It wasn't even in her words, which came in bursts, sharp, brief, enough to survive, but never enough to reveal. It came at night, when she thought I was asleep. Her lips moved against the dark, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in silence. A name, the same name, always. I didn't need to ask. I knew. The storms had taken everyone from everyone, but some names still lingered, clinging to the lips of the living, like threads too stubborn to break. Hers was the name of her sister. We hid in the wreck of a long-dead freight truck when the clouds started hunting again. Rust cut through the seams, but the metal roof still stood, and the floor was mostly dry. She settled down against the back wall, arms wrapped around her knees. I could see her face when the lightning cracked the horizon. Drawn tight, teeth clenched, eyes shut but moving, as though seeing something alive, in her head. "Your sister," I said before I could stop myself. Her head snapped up. Anger flickered across her face, then softened when she saw I wasn't mocking. "Just asking." "You dream out loud," I added. Her shoulders fell. She pulled her knees tighter. She was younger, 17 when it started. We were supposed to go together, but the house, the roof. Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard. I was the one who crawled out, not her. I said nothing. There were no words for guilt that deep. She breathed in shallow gasps, forcing herself not to break. If I stop saying her name, it's like I let go of her, and then she's gone forever. The thunder swallowed her last word. I knew about ghosts, not the kind that walked with sheets or rattled chains, but the ones that crouched inside your chest and pressed their weight against your lungs until breathing became a kind of sin. My father's voice had followed me for years, sharp, cutting, telling me I was weak, that storms were stronger than I'd ever be. Even dead, he lived in me. Even now, every step into the screaming winds felt like proving him right. Her ghost wasn't cruel like mine. Her ghost was gentle but heavy in a different way. A sister's shadow, one she kept holding on to so the world couldn't take that final piece. I almost envied it. The next morning, the storms pulled back. The air was thick with metallic heat, heavy enough to make our clothes stick to our skin. We moved east, toward the stretch of road where the map I carried had begun to fade. She walked slower that day, every limp more pronounced, every breath harsher. I thought of leaving her once, just the thought, sharp and quick, like a knife flashing in the dark. The thought sickened me as soon as it passed. But the world didn't care about sickness of the soul. The world only cared if you could keep moving. When she stumbled against a collapsed signpost, she didn't curse. She didn't complain. She only whispered, "Sorry," like she was apologizing to me or to the ghost that followed her. I crouched down, handed her the canteen. "Drink." She shook her head. "You need it more." I pressed it into her palm. My voice was harder than I meant. "Drink." She obeyed, but I saw it in her eyes. Every swallow was betrayal. Every drop down her throat meant less she could give to her sister if she ever found her again. That night, we built a small fire inside the shell of a diner. The windows were blown out, the booths overturned, the menu still clinging to one cracked wall. Tuesday special, fried chicken, $2. She stared at it like it was an artifact from another world. We used to eat out once a month. My sister would always pick the place, always picked wrong. A faint smile touched her lips. She was terrible at decisions. "Maybe she liked being wrong," I said. Her eyes flicked toward me. "What do you mean?" "It's easier when you don't have to be right, when someone else can laugh at you for it." She turned the thought over in her head, staring into the fire. For a moment, the shadow of her sister wasn't so heavy. For a moment, she smiled without breaking. But dawn broke cruel. We woke to silence that wasn't silence, air too still, sky too dark, as if the storm crouched above us, waiting. We ran before it could fall, across cracked pavement, through fields where the grass lay dead and twisted like wire. Her limp slowed us. Every step was another risk, another second closer to the storm's teeth. She knew it, I knew it, and still I matched her pace. By midday, we collapsed inside the skeleton of a gas station. My lungs burned, my throat dry. She curled up against a toppled shelf and whispered the name again. Her sister's name. Over and over, until it was prayer. I sat across from her, head tipped back against the wall. And for the first time since I'd found her, I whispered something too. My father's name. A name I'd buried so deep I hadn't said it aloud in years. The sound was ugly in my mouth, but it was real. Her eyes opened. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. The storm screamed past the station, rattling the roof and bending the steel frame. But inside, the two of us sat with our ghosts. Hers kind, mine cruel. Hers a shadow she clung to, mine a shadow I wanted to crush. Both of them alive in the silence between us. And in that silence, something fragile grew. Not hope yet, not trust, but the faintest thread, stretched between one ghost and another, holding us together against the endless sky. Chapter 15. The First Storm. Together. The horizon broke apart like torn paper. Clouds pressed low and furious, rolling in sheets the color of bruises. The air thickened, every breath pulling grit into my lungs. I felt it before I heard it. The slow, grinding build of a storm not passing overhead, but forming around us. We had run from storms before, hidden in the skeletons of dead buildings, pressed our backs against whatever steel or stone still stood. But this time, there was no shelter. Only flat land cut with broken fence posts, telephone lines snapped and hanging like nooses across the dirt. The woman stumbled beside me. Her limp was worse today, swollen, dragging. She leaned on me without asking, her weight throwing my balance off as we fought across the cracked road. For a long time I had thought she would say nothing, but her voice came in a rasp between breaths. "It's not passing." "No," I said. "It's not." She looked up, her hair whipping across her face. "Then what do we do?" The truth was simple. We survived or we didn't. The wind shifted first, snapping sharp enough to sting. Dust rose in sheets, scouring our eyes. I pulled her down with me behind the collapsed husk of a tractor. The machine was gutted, frame rusted through, but it was all we had. She pressed close, face hidden against her arm. Her breath came shallow, panicked. We can't stay here." "We don't have a choice." The ground trembled. A sound like the earth tearing itself apart shuddered through the air, low, groaning, endless. I knew that sound. Everyone who'd survived long enough did. A funnel was forming. I'd seen them before, always from a distance. Distant enough to believe the sky was just angry, not alive. But here, now, the birth of it was too close. The sky bent, clouds pulling inward, spiraling. The wind clawed in every direction, pulling dust and debris upward in a column of chaos. She gripped my sleeve hard enough to cut circulation. "We can't outrun it." "No," I said again. "We don't run." Her eyes widened. "Then what?" "Hold." It wasn't courage that made me say it. It wasn't faith. It was the only word left when there was nowhere else to go. The storm hit. It didn't come like rain or fire. It came like a hand closing around the world. The wind ripped at us, tearing clothes, pulling skin tight against bone. The tractor frame screamed, metal groanings as bolts strained. Shards of old plastic and splinters of wood whipped past, slicing the air. I wrapped both arms around her, pulled her tight against me, curled us into the shadow of the machine. Her fingers clawed into my back. I could feel every tremor in her body, every gasp of air stolen by the gale. The noise wasn't noise anymore. It was everything. The roar of the funnel, the scream of the earth, the snapping of trees ripped from roots, the crash of distant structures being devoured. It filled every space, pressing into my skull until thought dissolved. Only her heartbeat against my chest felt real. The storm wanted us. I could feel it, a living thing. Not a mind, not exactly, but a hunger. It pulled, tugged, tested. My grip on her felt small, fragile. I imagined her torn from me in an instant, lifted screaming into the black swirl above. "Don't let go," she screamed, voice raw against my ear. "Never," I shouted, though I didn't know if the storm heard me, if it cared, if words meant anything in its mouth. The funnel tilted, drifting across the plain. The tractor lifted an inch, slammed back down, lifted again. Any weaker, and it would have gone with the wind. But it stayed. And so we stayed. Every second was endless, every heartbeat stretched into forever. I thought of my father then, not as a voice, but as a memory of his hands. Broad, calloused, steady. He had braced walls when storms came, tied doors shut with rope, nailed boards across glass. He'd lived like he could outbuild the sky. And still the storms had taken him. But his hands lived in mine now, the way they locked tight, refusing to release, the way they anchored. Her sister lived in her the same way, I knew, not in body, but in will, in the way she held on even when the wind begged her to let go. Our ghosts clung together through us, and that was why we didn't break. Minutes or hours, time meant nothing inside the roar. And then, just as sudden as it had come, the storm tilted away. The funnel drifted, greedy for something else, pulling its scream into the distance. The wind dropped, leaving only dust, silence, and the ringing in my ears. We didn't move. Couldn't. I realized my arms were locked so tight around her, I might have bruised her ribs. Her face was buried in my chest, wet with sweat and tears. She pulled back, eyes wide, lips trembling. Her voice cracked when she spoke. We lived. Yes, I said. My throat was raw. We lived? The plain around us was gone. The fences ripped out, the road erased, trees snapped into splinters. The sky still boiled, black and violet. But the funnel itself had passed. She tried to stand, stumbled, nearly fell. I caught her arm. Together, I said. She nodded. It wasn't just about walking anymore. It wasn't about pace or burden or survival of one at the cost of the other. We had faced it. The storm not from the edges, but from the center. And neither of us had let go. We didn't have words for it, not yet. But it lived in the silence, a bond forged by the scream of the sky. For the first time since the storms began, I believed we could last. Not because we were strong, but because we were two. Chapter 16. Learning to move as two. The first days together were the hardest. Before, I had measured everything in terms of myself. How far I could walk on half a can of beans, how many hours I could push before my legs buckled, how long I could hunker down before my thoughts got loud enough to drown me. Survival was a ledger, simple math, one man against the world. Now the math didn't work anymore. Her steps dragged. Her breath came quick, ragged, catching on every incline. The swelling in her ankles slowed us down, turned half-day crossings into day-and-a-half slogs. I couldn't just push forward until exhaustion swallowed me whole. I had to stop when she couldn't, wait when she faltered, adjust every plan to match the rhythm of someone else's body. It should have been infuriating. It should have made me resent her. And sometimes it did. But then I'd look at her face, hollow with pain but stubborn with grit, and I saw my sister's shadow staring back at me. Thousands of miles and years gone. And I couldn't let go. Not again. We developed a system. I carried most of the weight, the salvaged tarp, the water jugs, the stripped-down camping stove I'd found in a crumbling sporting goods store. She kept only what she could manage. A blanket, her jacket, and a rusted knife with a chipped handle. When the ground leveled and the air stayed calm, I let her walk unaided. But when the wind picked up, or the earth turned jagged, or her steps slowed into a drag that made me wince just to hear it, I slipped her arm around my shoulders and took the strain myself. At first, she fought it. Pride was a crueler weight than any backpack. But storms had a way of humbling even the strongest. "Don't," I muttered once as she tried to push me away, nearly collapsing into the dirt. "Don't make it harder than it is." Her lips pressed tight, but she didn't argue again. We learned to move in silence. Not the silence of distrust. I'd had plenty of that in the wasteland, the kind of quiet that meant a knife might slip between your ribs if you turned the wrong way. This was a different kind, born of necessity. Talking wasted breath, and listening too hard to each other meant you missed the more important sounds. The rise of a wind front, the groan of a storm wall, the distant whine of a funnel clawing its way to earth. Her ankle forced us into shorter strides, and in the beginning it was agony. Every step felt like we were walking backward, the storm at our heels. But with time, my body adjusted. My thoughts adjusted. I stopped thinking about distance and started thinking about endurance. Maybe that was survival's real trick, not moving faster, not stronger, but slower in the right way. The nights were worse. Before, I slept like prey, light, twitching awake at every creak of steel or whistle of wind. But now, I couldn't sleep at all. I lay awake listening to her breathe, thin and uneven, and every pause between breaths felt like a cliff edge. She tried to hide it, but pain followed her into sleep. Sometimes she whimpered. Sometimes she gasped awake, clutching her ankle, eyes wide and glassy, until she realized she wasn't alone. Those nights, I shared what little rations I had, pressing them into her hands, even when my stomach twisted in protest. Hunger had always been my companion, my punishment for being alive, but it was different when I watched it eat at someone else. She noticed, of course. "You're starving yourself," she said one dawn, her voice rasping. "I've gone longer," I lied. "You can't keep carrying me and feeding me both." "I can." The truth was, I didn't know if I could. But lies are sometimes the only way to keep moving. We began to talk in fragments, never whole stories, never the weight of who we had been before, but shards dropped in the silence like stones breaking water. "My name's Mara," she said one afternoon, when we crouched under the wreckage of a billboard as a lightning chain tore across the plains. The name hit me like a fist. My sister's name had been Marin. I didn't tell her that. I just nodded because saying anything would have cracked something open I wasn't ready to face. "Your name?" she asked after a moment. I hesitated. It had been years since anyone asked. Years since it mattered. "Call me Eli," I said finally. It wasn't exactly a lie. We found food in small, desperate places. An overturned delivery truck, rusted through, its cargo spoiled long ago. But in the bottom of one box, sealed tight in plastic, I found 3 packs of powdered soup. Stale, chemical, but edible. We split them in silence that night, drinking the thin broth from dented tin cups like it was a feast. Another day, in the shell of a farmhouse, I pried open a cellar door and found jars of pickled vegetables sealed in brine. Most had cracked, mold blooming inside, but one remained intact. We ate it slow, sharing slices like communion. Every time, her face softened, the hard edge of pain easing for a moment. Every time, I told myself I'd starve another week if it meant I could see that look again. The world tested us. It always did. One afternoon, the sky blackened without warning. Not a funnel this time, but a storm wall stretching horizon to horizon. The wind hit like a freight train, bending trees until they snapped, pulling sheets of corrugated metal from the ground like blades. We couldn't run. Her ankle made sure of that. So we dropped low, clawed our way into a drainage ditch thick with mud and broken glass. I wrapped the tarp over us, anchoring it with my body, every muscle screaming as the wind tried to rip it free. She pressed against me, trembling, her fingers digging into my sleeve. "Don't let it take me," she whispered. "I won't." The storm raged above us, endless. The tarp flapped, tore in places, slapped against our backs with every gust. I thought more than once we'd be pulled skyward, shredded into the chain lightning tearing the clouds apart. But we weren't. We lived through it. And when the storm moved on, leaving silence like a wound, we crawled from the ditch together, covered in mud and shaking but alive. Together. Always together. Over time, I stopped thinking of her as the woman. She was Mara, fragile and strong, stubborn and afraid, carrying her broken body like a badge of survival. She reminded me of my sister in ways that cut deep, but she was also herself, and I owed her the truth of that. We weren't fast. We weren't efficient. Some days, I thought we wouldn't last another sunrise. But we learned how to move as two, how to trade pace for endurance, silence for trust, hunger for hope. The storms were endless, but so were we. Chapter 17. Rumors of Shelter. The storms never let you forget where you were. Even in the rare moments of quiet, when the air calmed, when the sky cracked open enough to show a strip of pale sun, the world around us carried the scars. Trees stripped bare, their trunks twisted like bone. Houses flattened into splinters or standing crooked, windows gaping like eyeless sockets. Cars overturned and gutted, metal scorched black by lightning strikes. The land wasn't a place anymore. It was a graveyard that never stopped growing. That morning, we picked through the skeleton of what might have been a gas station. The sign out front had collapsed into the lot, its metal warped beyond recognition. But the smell of old fuel still clung to the air. Mara leaned against the doorway, her weight balanced on the good leg. Her ankle hadn't healed, not really, but she moved better now. Not fast, not steady, but better. I scavenged through shelves half buried under dust and broken glass. Most of it was ruined. Bags split open, boxes molded through. But behind the counter, I found a tin of instant coffee still sealed, and a row of lighters. "Score," I muttered, turning one over. Mara's lips curved into something almost like a smile. "You're too excited about fire." "Fire's the only reason we're not bones right now." I slipped 2 lighters into my pocket, tossed one to her. She caught it clumsily, rolling it between her fingers. Her smile faded, and her gaze drifted past me to the far wall. "You ever hear about safe places?" The word struck sharper than any wind. I froze, one hand still buried in the shelf. "Safe places?" "Yeah." She shifted uncomfortably. "Before I met you, people talked, said there were places the storms couldn't touch, underground bunkers, cities that figured out how to build against it all. I don't know if it's real, just rumors." I stared at her, the weight of it pressing down like a second storm. Rumors were dangerous. Hope was dangerous. We left the gas station by midday, clouds dragging thick across the horizon. The silence between us was heavier than the packs on our backs. I wanted to dismiss it, to call it nonsense, to remind her that the world didn't work like that anymore. There weren't safe places, only places that hadn't been torn apart yet. But the way she said it, half hopeful, half afraid of her own voice, made me hold my tongue. We walked slow, her limp steady. The ground cracked underfoot. The air stank of ozone. "You think it's real?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I didn't answer right away. My eyes traced the sky, the jagged rip across the clouds where a lightning chain had ripped open the night 2 days ago. My ears tuned to the low hum of wind gathering in the distance. "Finally," I said, "I don't think real matters anymore." She frowned. "Then what does?" "If people believe it, they'll look for it. If they're looking, maybe they'll survive a little longer." Her face tightened, but she didn't push. She didn't need to. The truth hung between us anyway. If there was even a chance, what choice did we have but to follow it? That night, we found shelter in the ruins of a farmhouse. The roof was gone, but the walls still stood on 3 sides. We built a fire from splintered beams, shielding it from the wind with scraps of tin. The coffee boiled thin, bitter, but it was warm. Mara cradled the tin cup in both hands like it was gold. "Where would you go?" she asked softly, staring into the fire. "What?" If there was a place, safe I mean, where would you want it to be? I thought of my sister, thousands of miles away when the storms began. I thought of the last message she sent before the sky fell silent. 3 words. Are you safe? It didn't matter what I'd replied. Nothing had gotten through. Mountains, I said finally. High ground. Easier to defend. Harder for people to find you. Storms hit mountains too. Not like they hit here. Her lips pressed tight. She sipped the coffee, winced at the taste. I'd want it near water. I tilted my head. Why? Because storms can take everything else. Food, houses, people. But if you've got water, you've got a chance. Her eyes met mine across the fire, sharp in the flickering light. For the first time, I realized she wasn't just repeating something she'd heard. She was planning. The next morning, the storm came early. We heard it first. The low moan across the plains, building fast. Then the air shifted, the kind of pressure that made your bones ache. We scrambled. There was no time to argue. I threw the pack over my shoulder, pulled her close, and we staggered into the basement of the farmhouse. It was shallow, walls lined with broken shelves, floor slick with damp. We crouched in the corner as the storm hit. The wind screamed through the holes in the roof. Debris pounded the walls, each impact like a hammer blow. Above us, the house groaned. Mara pressed against me, trembling. I felt her lips close to my ear. You think it's out there? What? The place, the shelter. You think it's real? I didn't answer at first. The storm raged too loud. My throat felt like it had swallowed dust. But finally, as the walls shuddered and the ceiling shook loose flakes of plaster, I whispered, I think it has to be. Her fingers tightened around mine, and for the first time in years, I let myself believe in something I hadn't seen with my own eyes. When the storm passed, the house was gone. Only the basement stood, a hollow cut into the earth. We climbed out into a wasteland of splinters. Mara leaned on me, her face pale but determined. Then we look, she said. It wasn't a suggestion. And just like that, survival wasn't about another day anymore. It was about finding, about chasing a rumor sharp enough to cut through the dark. Chapter 18. The Tornado Wall. The horizon was no longer a horizon. It had always been there. Storms, stacked in impossible numbers, carving a false skyline where sky met ruin. But this was different. The land ahead folded upward like the rim of the world had been stitched to the clouds. A wall, not stone, not mountain, something alive, churning, collapsing into itself, and then ballooning outward again. Tornadoes by the dozen, each tethered to the earth like spears of black glass. They swayed and coiled, pulling dirt into the air, pulling screams out of the wind. I stopped walking. She bumped into me, muttering, "What?" before her breath caught in her throat. We stood there for a long time, or maybe it was no time at all. I couldn't tell anymore, not with the sound. It wasn't wind the way I'd ever known it. It was a continent breaking apart, stretched into voices, layered into a roar so low it rattled my bones. "This isn't real," she whispered. I wanted to agree, but it was. The wall ran north to south, so wide I couldn't see its edges. To the west, the funnels bent into the clouds, shredding what little light seeped through. To the east, they swung closer to the ground, some collapsing in furious spirals, only to reform seconds later. No path, no gaps, a barrier drawn straight across the world. And we had to cross it. I laughed, short, hollow, ugly. the kind of laugh that doesn't belong to humor. We're supposed to go through that. She shook her head. We can't. There's no way. There has to be. I turned, scanning the sky, the ground, looking for something the way a drowning man looks for shore. If there's no way, then we're done. That's it. So there has to be. Her face was pale under the dust, streaked with old blood from a cut she'd stopped mentioning days ago. She looked at me like she wanted to believe, but couldn't make herself. We walked closer anyway. Every step was harder. The wind grew teeth, biting through our clothes, pulling at our packs, tugging her hair until it wrapped around her mouth. The ground shook as though 1,000 trains were circling us underground. Sand lashed sideways, sharp as wire. By the time we were a mile out, the wall towered so high I couldn't tell where it ended. Funnels twisted around each other like braided muscle. Some touched down and stripped entire fields bare in minutes. Others hovered above the earth, snapping lightning between their bases. She screamed something at me, but the sound drowned in the storm. I grabbed her hand, kept pulling. And then we found it. Not an opening, not exactly, but a place where the tornadoes thinned, like uneven stitches in a seam. Still a gauntlet of moving death, but not completely sealed. I stopped and pointed, though I wasn't sure she saw. Her lips moved. I caught only one word: suicide. She wasn't wrong. We crouched in the shelter of a broken grain silo. The walls rattled, threatening collapse at every gust, but at least it was something. I pressed my forehead to the cold metal and shut my eyes. "Tell me it's worth it," she said. I opened them again. What? All this, every step, every time I almost died. Tell me there's something on the other side. Because if there isn't... Her voice broke. Then maybe we should stop here. The silence between us lasted longer than it should have. I can't tell you that, I said finally. But if we stop here, it ends anyway. So we might as well move until something kills us. She stared at me, hollow-eyed, then laughed once, sharp and bitter. "You're terrible at speeches." "I know." But she didn't argue anymore. We waited until the funnel shifted, leaving a thin corridor of dirt and dust. Then we ran. The ground tilted sideways under the pull of the nearest vortex. My legs went heavy, like lead had melted into my bones. I felt her stumble, and my hand shot back, catching her wrist just before the wind could tear her away. Her scream ripped through me. "Don't let go." I wouldn't. I couldn't. We pushed forward into the heart of the storm. The sound was unbearable now. I couldn't hear my own breath, couldn't hear her voice, couldn't hear anything but the scream of air tearing itself apart. My vision blurred. Dust filled my lungs. I bent low, dragging her with me, each step a war. A funnel collapsed 30 yards ahead, slamming into the earth like a giant's fist. Dirt rose in a wave that knocked us flat. I rolled, throwing my body over hers, teeth clenched, praying the storm wouldn't take us both. It passed. We crawled, stumbled, ran again. Every moment stretched into forever. At one point, I thought my arm had dislocated from holding her. At another, I lost track of her voice and thought she was gone until her nails dug into my skin. The wall kept shifting, alive, unending. I thought we'd never find the other side, that maybe there wasn't one. But then, light. Not much. Not sun. Just a gap in the clouds where something less black filtered through. I dragged her toward it, lungs burning, muscles screaming. The wind fought us every step, but the pull ahead was stronger than the push behind. We broke through. The world didn't change, not really. Still storm-racked, still shredded and broken. But the wall was behind us now, receding into distance. The funnels merged into one horizon line again, impossibly tall but no longer right on top of us. We collapsed in the mud. I lay there gasping, chest rising and falling like it might split open. She pressed her face into the ground, sobbing soundlessly. Alive. Somehow, still alive. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, I let myself believe in something like hope. Fragile, pathetic, but real. The wall hadn't stopped us. Nothing had. Not yet. Chapter 19, when trust breaks, the wall was behind us. That should have been enough. But walls don't stay behind forever. Not here. Not in this world. The first day after crossing, we didn't speak much. Our throats were torn raw from the storm, and silence was easier than admitting we were both half broken. She walked behind me, every step dragging, her hands trembling from the strain of holding on so long. I wanted to say something, thanks, maybe, or encouragement, but the words wouldn't come. Words felt cheap after what we'd clawed through. By nightfall, the air was calmer. Not calm, never calm, but softer, like the storm had decided we'd earned a breath. We found a hollow where a burned-out school bus lay on its side. Windows shattered, frame rusting, seats gutted by weather. Shelter by this world's standards. Inside, the air smelled like iron and mold. I sat on the twisted floor, trying to stretch my arm where her grip had left it bruised purple. She sat opposite, hugging her knees, staring at nothing. Finally, she said, "You would have left me." The words hit harder than any wind. What? Her eyes snapped to me. In the storm, I saw it. You almost did. You thought about it. I shook my head. No. Yes, don't lie. Her voice cracked. You thought about letting go. The truth was sharper than I wanted to admit. For 1 second, maybe less, maybe more, I had thought it. The wind had pulled her sideways and my arm had screamed under her weight. The thought had whispered, if you let go, you live. If you let go, you run faster. But I hadn't. I didn't let go, I said, harsher than I meant. You're still here, aren't you? Her lip curled, not quite a smile, not quite anger. That's not the same as not thinking about it. Silence stretched. Dust rattled in through broken glass. I carried you through, I muttered. I dragged you across. What else do you want me to say? She didn't answer. That night, sleep never came. I lay with my back against cold steel, listening to the groan of the bus in the wind, feeling the space between us grow wider, even though we were only feet apart. The days blurred. We walked, ate what little we had left, shared water when the bottles sweated empty. She didn't look at me as much anymore, didn't ask questions, didn't laugh the way she sometimes used to when exhaustion bent into delirium. At first, I told myself it was just fatigue, trauma, the aftermath of survival. But deep down, I knew. The storm hadn't broken her trust. I had. One afternoon, she lagged too far behind. I turned and saw her doubled over, hands on her knees, breath sawing in and out. Come on, I said. She shook her head. I can't. You can. We don't stop here. Then leave me. The words were soft, but they froze me. What did you just say? Leave me. You're thinking it anyway. I'm slowing you down. I see it in your face. That's not... I swallowed. The wind howled, carrying the lie away. That's not true." She laughed bitterly. "You don't even sound like you believe that." I wanted to scream. At her, at myself, at the sky. But what came out was quieter. "I didn't drag you through hell just to leave you in the dirt now." Her eyes glistened, though I couldn't tell if it was tears or dust. "Then stop looking at me like I'm dead weight." That night, the air shifted. The clouds cracked with lightning in the distance, strings of fire dancing across the horizon. The kind of storm that doesn't move, doesn't pass, just sits there, hungry. We huddled under a collapsed overpass, the concrete pressing close. I tried again. "You don't get it. I can't do this alone." "You did it before me?" "That was different." "Different how?" I didn't have an answer. Her face twisted. "You think you saved me, but maybe I saved you. You needed someone to follow, to keep your head straight. Without me, maybe you'd have walked into the wall and never come out." The worst part? She might have been right. The cracks widened. The next morning, she woke before me and had already started walking. No word, no glance, just gone ahead. My chest clenched in panic until I spotted her figure on the road, small against the endless wasteland. We traveled like that, together, but not together. Close enough to see, far enough not to touch. Every time she stumbled, I felt the question burn behind my ribs. Would you catch her again? Would you hold on? And every time, I hated myself for not knowing the answer. It came to a breaking point 3 days later. The road bent along the edge of a gorge. The earth had split wide, a jagged scar carved by storms years ago. A bridge had once crossed it, but only the supports remained, twisted steel dangling like bones. We had no choice but to climb down and back up the other side. The descent was brutal. Loose rock, mud slick with recent rain, gusts that threatened to knock us sideways into the pit. Halfway down, she slipped. Her scream tore the air as she slid on her back, stones flying. I lunged, dropping my pack, reaching, caught her wrist again, the exact same grip as in the wall. Her nails dug into my skin, her eyes wide, wild, full of something that wasn't trust anymore. "Don't let go." The words were the same as before, but they didn't mean the same. Because this time, she didn't believe I wouldn't. For a heartbeat, the world hung there. The storm above, the gorge below, her weight in my hand. And I thought of everything. Her words, her doubt, my hesitation. I hauled her up anyway. Muscles screamed, breath shredded. But I dragged her onto the ledge until we both collapsed against the dirt. She stared at me, panting, trembling. Then she whispered, "You thought about it again." I couldn't answer. Her tears cut streaks through the dust. She curled away from me, clutching her arms like they could hold her together. Trust wasn't just cracked, it was shattered. We climbed out of the gorge in silence. The world above looked the same as before. Ruins, storms, a sky with no mercy. But everything between us had changed. We kept walking, because that's all we could do. But for the first time, I didn't know if we were walking together anymore. Chapter 20. A world falling from the sky. The sky started breaking before the ground did. At first, it was just a sound. A low rumble, different from thunder, deeper than the growl of shifting storms. I'd grown used to the language of weather. When the air went sharp before lightning, when the wind curved before a funnel dropped. But this was something else. Something I felt more in my bones than my ears. The woman, still limping, still silent more often than not, froze mid-step, her head tilted, eyes scanning the sky. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. "Yeah," I muttered. We both looked up. And there it was. The moon, or what was left of it, was bleeding. Not light, but debris. Massive chunks had begun to shift in their fractured orbit, tugged loose by some unseen hand. A bright scar tore across the heavens as rock flamed into the atmosphere, streaking fire through the black. I'd seen meteor showers before. Not like this. This wasn't beauty. This was the sky cracking open, dumping pieces of itself onto the earth. The first one hit miles away, a dull boom rolling across the wasteland. The ground under our boots trembled. Birds, what few had survived this long, rose shrieking into the air, only to be thrown sideways by the winds that followed. Another streak, another boom. Closer this time. The woman's hand tightened on her makeshift crutch. She glanced at me. "What do we do?" What could we do? Run? There was no outrunning the sky. Hide? Where? Every shelter we'd found so far was nothing against something falling from orbit. Still, I forced words out. Move. Anything's better than standing still. We staggered across the ruins, weaving between rusted husks of cars and collapsed brick walls. The rumbling grew louder, closer, until my teeth rattled with each impact. I tried to keep her moving, one hand on her shoulder, but she jerked away. "I can do it," she snapped. Her voice was brittle, but she kept hobbling forward. Dust rained down with every strike, choking the air. Then one hit too close. The flash lit the world white. The shock wave punched the ground out from under us. I hit the dirt hard, ears screaming, lungs empty. When I rolled over, everything was smoke and flame. Through the haze, I saw her crumpled shape a few feet away. "Get up," I yelled, crawling toward her. My voice was swallowed by the roar overhead, but she stirred, coughing. Blood trickled from her nose. She tried to rise and stumbled again. I hooked her arm over my shoulders, ignoring the sharp protest of her weight. We staggered toward the nearest shadow that might be cover, a concrete stairwell leading underground. Each step felt like moving through a nightmare. Fire fell around us. The ground split in spiderweb cracks. The air was hot enough to sear the skin raw. By the time we reached the stairwell, another impact shook the city. The mouth of the stairs groaned as rubble tumbled across it. I shoved her inside, then dove in after her as the entrance collapsed behind us. Darkness, dust, the echo of the world dying above. For a moment, neither of us breathed. Then I heard her sob once, sharp, cut off like she didn't want me to hear it. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her we'd made it, that we were alive. That was something. But the word stuck, because alive didn't mean safe. Alive just meant waiting for the next thing to kill us. The stairwell led down to a service corridor. Damp concrete, pipes weeping rust, the smell of mildew thick enough to gag. We followed it deeper, stumbling in the dark, my hand against the wall. Each impact from above shuddered through the stone, raining dust on our heads. Finally, we reached a door. Steel dented but intact. I shoved it open. Inside, a bunker, abandoned but real. Cots lined one wall, mildewed but still standing. Shelves sagged with cans, their labels faded but legible. My chest tightened. A cache, a miracle. She collapsed onto one of the cots, face pale, breaths shallow. Her ankle was worse now, swollen from the sprint, her whole body trembling. I set my pack down, sat across from her. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The world above thundered on. Hours passed, maybe days. Time meant nothing underground. We rationed what we found. Old beans, cracked crackers, water that tasted like metal. We ate in silence, the only sound the rattle of distant collapses. But silence is its own kind of torture. On the third day, she finally said, "I don't trust you." The words landed like a blade. "I know," I whispered. She stared at the wall, not at me. "I think you'll drop me the second it keeps you alive." "I didn't," I said. My voice sounded strange, even to me. "I haven't. Not once." "You thought about it?" The quiet pressed in until I couldn't stand it. "So what? You think I don't know what that means? You think I don't hate myself for it?" Her eyes flicked to me, sharp as glass. "Then why keep me with you?" The question cracked something inside me. Because you're the only thing keeping me human. Without you, I'd just be another shadow out there, waiting for the storms to finish me. With you, I remember what it's for, why I'm still moving. Her mouth tightened. She didn't answer. But she didn't leave either. That night, I dreamed of the sky tearing open, of fire raining down until nothing remained but ash. When I woke, the bunker's ceiling trembled with another distant impact. We both knew we couldn't stay. Food would run out, air would grow foul, and when the debris finally hit close enough, this place would bury us alive. So we climbed back to the stairwell. The entrance was choked with rubble, but not sealed. I scraped and shoved until daylight spilled through, a weak, smoky light. We emerged into a world changed again. The city was no longer ruins. It was craters, entire blocks gone, replaced by pits still smoldering. Towers that had survived the storms for years now lay folded like paper. The air shimmered with heat, smoke, and the stench of burning stone. The woman gripped my arm, leaning heavy. Her face was streaked with ash. "This world is ending," she whispered. "No," I said, though my voice was hollow. "It already ended. We're just still here." Above us, the sky rumbled again. Another streak of fire, another piece of the broken moon falling. The world wasn't just storms anymore. Now the sky itself was the enemy. Chapter 21. The Kindness of Strangers. The first voice we heard that wasn't our own felt like a trick. We'd been walking through a blasted district. Blackened skeletons of high-rises bent over the streets. Cars half melted where debris strikes had turned metal liquid. The ground still smoked. Every breath tasted of ash. Then came the sound. A word, muffled but clear. "Hey!" I froze. The woman froze beside me, her weight pressing against my shoulder where she leaned. My first thought was hallucination. The storms could do that. Scramble the senses until you heard voices in the wind. But it came again. "Hey, you there!" I turned. A figure waved from the ruins of what had once been a grocery store. His clothes were rags, his beard tangled, but his voice was strong. "Get in here before the next strike," he shouted. The woman gripped my arm tighter. Her eyes were wide. Fear, not hope. I hesitated too long. Another roar cracked the sky. Fire streaked down, detonating in the distance with a shock wave that rattled my teeth. The stranger was already retreating into the building. "We can't," she whispered. "We'll die out here," I said. Her gaze bored into me. Or in there. The choice wasn't a choice. I dragged her toward the door. Inside was dim, lit by the flicker of a lantern. The air smelled of smoke and unwashed bodies. Shapes moved in the shadows, 3 more figures, gaunt and wary. The bearded man set down his lantern. You picked the right moment. That one was close. I kept my body angled between him and the woman. Who are you? He shrugged. Same as you. People too stubborn to die. Name's Cal. That's Miri, Owen, and Jax. The names meant nothing. Faces meant nothing. In this world, strangers were danger more often than salvation. But they had food. I saw it. Cans stacked behind them, maybe 10 or 12, precious beyond measure. Miri, the thin woman by the wall, eyed us with suspicion. You'll eat what little we've got left. We won't take anything, I said quickly. We just need a place to wait out the strikes. Cal tilted his head. Your girl looks rough. She's not. The words caught in my throat. She's hurt, that's all. The woman glanced at me, but said nothing. Owen, younger, maybe 20, shoved a can toward us anyway. Here, just take it. You look like ghosts. Miri hissed. We can't. We can, Owen snapped. What good is kindness if we never use it? The silence that followed was thick. We stayed, for one night. The 5 of them huddled in corners, speaking in low voices about roots, caches, storms. I sat awake, listening, my knife in hand, the woman sleeping fitful against my side. Part of me wanted to trust them, to believe that other people meant safety, meant chance. But the louder part whispered that trust was death. In the early hours, Cal joined me by the broken doorway. His beard twitched as he spoke. She's not your sister, is she? My pulse stuttered. What makes you say that? The way you look at her. Not like blood, not like a lover either. Something in between. Burden and anchor both. I said nothing. Cal's eyes glinted. Don't let it break you. People like us. We can't afford to carry ghosts. I wanted to argue, but I didn't, because I wasn't sure he was wrong. Morning came gray, with streaks of smoke across the sky. The impacts had slowed, though thunder still rolled above. We prepared to leave. Miri stopped us at the doorway. Don't come back, she said flatly. I nodded. We won't. Owen pressed something into my hand anyway. A single can of beans, dented but sealed. His eyes were too bright for this world. You'll need it more. I stared at him. Why? Because you've got someone to protect. That's harder than just yourself. For a moment, the kindness nearly broke me. My throat clenched, words failing. Then we stepped back into the storm shadow. We walked in silence for hours. The woman finally spoke when the ruins faded behind us. You didn't tell them my name? I glanced at her. I didn't think it mattered. It does. Why? Because if I don't have a name, I don't exist. The words gutted me. After a long silence, I said, Then tell me again, so I don't forget. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. She said her name. And I repeated it, like an oath against the endless sky. That night, when the thunder returned and the earth shook with another distant impact, I dreamed of Owen's face, of his kindness, of how quickly kindness can be extinguished in this world. I didn't know if he and the others would survive another week. But I knew we couldn't go back. The road ahead was still ours alone. Chapter 22. The Collapse. The world had always been falling apart. The storms chewed their way across the land, stripping trees to bone and toppling towers of concrete as if they were playthings. But this was different. This was not weather pressing in from above or across the horizon. This was something inside, something breaking where no one could patch it. It started with the rhythm of their steps. They had walked together for weeks now, through gales, through poisoned rain, through nights when neither dared close their eyes for long. And in that time, they had learned to move almost like one body. But today, in the raw gray light after another sleepless night, their pace fell apart. The woman dragged behind, shoulders caving under her pack, her breath a rasping saw that cut the silence between gusts. The man glanced back again and again, each time slower, each time waiting longer before urging her on. And each time he did, he could feel the storm in himself tightening. "You're falling behind." "I know." Her voice was ragged, ground down by exhaustion. She didn't argue, didn't ask for a break, didn't accuse him of cruelty. She just admitted the truth. And somehow, that was worse. Because he didn't want truth anymore. He wanted her strong. He wanted her to be the miracle that proved he hadn't doomed them both. He wanted her to carry herself. But her knees buckled, and she hit the ground hard. "Get up," he snapped. Too quick, too sharp. His voice broke on the words, revealing the panic underneath. She pressed her hands against the dirt, trembling. She pushed once, twice, failed. Her hair hung like a curtain over her face. He stood above her, helpless, and the storm in his chest roared louder. This is it. This is where it all breaks. The collapse was not a single event, but a cascade. The first crack came from within him, a fissure of doubt spreading fast. He had carried her through floodwater, shielded her from hail that could split a skull, fought hunger beside her. But now, here, with the world still clawing at them, he was ready to let go. The thought terrified him. The second crack came from her. She looked up, eyes dull, lips parting not for protest or plea, but for a whisper. "Leave me." 2 words. Not loud, not angry, not dramatic. Just tired, just final. And he hated her for them. Not truly, not in the marrow where he still loved her like a tether to humanity. But in that moment, rage flared hotter than compassion. Rage that she would ask him to confirm his worst fear, that he couldn't save her. The third crack came from the sky itself. A roar rose from beyond the ridge, a tornado wall grinding closer, sweeping a skin of trees and dirt into its maw. The earth shuddered under its hunger. And in that instant, him staring down at her, her staring up at him, the storm bearing down, they broke. He dropped his pack. He dropped into the mud beside her, hands gripping her arms, not tender, but desperate. "Don't you dare." "I can't." "You can. You will." "Why?" He had no answer. Not one that would matter against the black jaw of the tornado. Not one that would undo the weight on her chest or the burn in her lungs. "Because if you stop, I stop." His voice cracked. "And I can't stop. Not now. Not here." The storm reached them. Wind lashed, tearing at their clothes, dragging the air from their throats. Dust and splinters cut their faces. The tornado screamed like a god unchained. They had seconds. He hooked his arm under hers, pulled her up. She stumbled, legs useless. He dragged her, step after agonized step, toward a ditch half hidden by shattered branches. The air tried to wrench her away from him, to rip her from his grip. His shoulder wrenched, pain searing white. But he didn't let go. If she went, he went. That was the pact now. They fell into the ditch just as the tornado rolled over. the world above turned to black teeth and splintering roar. The ground trembled. For a moment, it felt like the earth itself was peeling away, like they were falling into some bottomless maw. She clung to him then, not out of choice, but pure animal terror. He clutched back, anchoring them to each other more than the soil around them. For endless minutes, the world tried to erase them. And then, finally, silence fell. When they crawled out, the landscape had been rewritten. The ridge was gone, shaved flat. The trees were shattered stumps. The air reeked of ripped earth and ozone. He turned to her, expecting collapse again, expecting the words, "Leave me," to resurface. But her eyes were different now, not bright, not strong, but refusing to quit, refusing to give him what he had almost accepted. He realized then that they had collapsed together, and in that collapse had fused into something harder, something less breakable. Not whole, never whole, but still here. Still here. Chapter 23. The Black Sky. The sky had always been a wound. A torn canvas stretched above them, scarred by smoke, bruised by storms, bleeding light through rents in the cloud banks. But today it was worse. Today it was not storm alone. It was void. Black. Not the gray-black haze they were used to, not the soot-choked smog that blotted the stars. No, this was deeper, heavier. A lid slammed shut over the world, swallowing the sun, swallowing even the illusion of horizon. It began while they were walking through the flattened remains of a forest. The trunks lay like corpses all around them, snapped at the base, some still smoldering from lightning strikes. The woman paused first, tilting her head back. "Do you see it?" He followed her gaze, heart already tightening, because he had been pretending not to. The light was thinning. The shadows weren't shifting like they should. Instead, they just grew, expanded, bleeding outward until even the ash looked darker. And then the light was gone. No dusk, no transition, no warning, just absence. The man felt his chest seize. The woman clutched his arm instinctively, fingers digging in. They stood in the corpse forest, listening to silence sharpen. The black sky had arrived. At first they waited, as though this new horror would pass as all things passed. Storm, quake, fire, flood. But the void did not pass. Hours stretched, and still no dawn, no star, no moon. Their watches stopped ticking. The compass needles spun lazy circles, drunk and meaningless. Even the wind seemed confused, blowing first one way, then another, before stalling altogether. The world was a blindfold now, tight and suffocating. "We should move," he said finally, though his throat was dry. "Standing still will kill us." "Where?" she whispered. He didn't answer. There was nowhere left, only forward. So they moved, step by step, packs dragging, eyes straining to catch shapes in the pitch. Their hands stayed locked together, hers cold, his trembling despite the heat of exertion. Every sound was magnified. The crunch of debris, the rasp of their breath, the occasional distant groan of something collapsing. The darkness was not empty. It was alive, pressing against them, swallowing their movements. It was too easy to imagine creatures in it. At one point, the woman stumbled and let out a cry, and he nearly screamed in answer, spinning with fists raised, convinced that something had grabbed her. But it was only a root, slick with rain, invisible until her knee struck it. She laughed once, a broken, hysterical sound. And he hushed her quick, because laughter felt like bait. They walked until their bodies demanded they stop. They huddled against the carcass of a fallen tree, its trunk wider than a house, and lit no fire. In the dark, their words slipped out like confessions. "I dreamed of this once," she murmured. "Before I found you, I dreamed the sky went black. And when it did, the ground opened. People fell forever." He swallowed hard. "Do you think this is it? The end?" A long silence. Then, "No. The world doesn't end. It just keeps getting worse." Her voice was flat. No bitterness, just fact. He wanted to argue. He wanted to say, "We'll make it. We'll find the safe zone. We'll live." But the black pressed against his lips, smothering lies before they could escape. So he held her instead, and together they pretended sleep. When they woke, if it could be called waking, since the dark was unchanged, the air had shifted. It tasted metallic, sharp, like the edge of lightning without the light. His tongue felt thick. Her breath wheezed harsher than before. They walked again, though their steps were slower. He noticed how her head lolled more often, how her grip on his hand slackened. At one point, she whispered, "I think I see lights." He followed her gaze, squinting, but there was nothing but dark. He didn't correct her. He let her believe. Later, he saw them too. Not real, not steady, just flickers at the edge of sight, pinpricks of pale green and violet that darted away whenever he tried to focus. Hallucinations. Still, they kept moving toward them, because direction was a luxury. The collapse came sudden. They were climbing a slope of broken rock when the woman's legs gave out. She crumpled sideways, her shoulders striking stone, and her body slid backward several feet before he caught her. "Get up," he begged, voice shredded. She shook her head faintly. "No use. You said it yourself. Nowhere left." Don't you dare. We didn't come this far to stop here." She laughed again, softer this time, like the ghost of a child. "Where is here?" He couldn't answer. He pressed his forehead against hers instead, whispering, "Please, just one more step, one more, always one more." But her eyes drifted shut. Her chest rose shallow, almost nothing. And then, the world answered. A tremor shook the ground, low and rumbling, rolling through the stone like thunder and bone. Far off, something split with a crack like heaven breaking. And in the black above, a seam appeared. Just a thin line at first, white-blue, pulsing faintly. It quivered, widened, spilling light down like blood from a wound. He gasped. The woman stirred, eyelids fluttering open. They both stared as the seam stretched, jagged, crooked, until a great tear opened in the dark. Through it, not sky, not sun, but storm, endless storm. Clouds twisted, lightning lanced, rain whipped sideways in eternal torrents. The black sky was not emptiness. It was a veil, and now it had torn. The stormlight gave them just enough to move again. He dragged her up, half carrying, half pulling. Together they stumbled down the slope toward a distant rise where rock gave way to shadowed ridges. Behind them, the seam spread wider. The black shredded. The storm poured through. But the tearing sky brought no comfort. The lightning revealed corpses scattered across the land. Bodies fossilized in postures of terror, skin turned to stone, eyes hollowed. Every flash showed more. Dozens, hundreds, piled in gulches, strewn along ridges. She clutched him tighter. "Don't look." But he couldn't stop. The dead were everywhere. as though the black sky had already swallowed them before tearing open for the living. By the time they reached the ridge, the storm was howling again. Sheets of rain lashed their faces. The woman staggered under the weight of her pack. He wanted to rip it from her shoulders, throw it away, but he knew it was the last of their supplies. They crouched under an overhang, drenched, gasping. Lightning split the horizon, showing nothing but more ruin. "This is it," he said at last, voice hollow. "This is the world now. Black above, storm below. Nothing left?" She stared at him, rain streaking her face like tears. "Then we go on anyway." Her words landed like stones, heavy, undeniable. He let out a sound, half laugh, half sob, and pulled her against him. For the first time since the sky went black, he felt something flicker inside. Not hope, not yet, but defiance. Because she was right. There was no reason, no future, no safety. And still they went on. That night, as they huddled soaked and shivering, he opened his eyes to see her watching the storm through the torn seam above. "What are you looking at?" he whispered. She didn't turn. "The black will close again. I know it will. And when it does, we'll forget the storm exists. We'll think the void is all there is. But it isn't. It never was." Her voice was steady, almost serene. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust that the sky's collapse meant something, that the veil had lifted for a reason. But as he watched the seam tear wider, spilling endless storm across the world, he wondered if meaning itself had collapsed too. Still, he held her hand until sleep came, and the black sky loomed above them, vast and eternal. Chapter 24. The Door in the Mountain. The storms never stop. That truth had always been carved into his bones, branded into every scar, every sleepless night. Tornadoes had no mercy. Lightning no conscience, thunder no warning. The shattered moon had cursed the world, and earth had obeyed. But as he and the woman pushed into the range of jagged peaks that rose like broken teeth from the horizon, he realized something was different. The storms still roared behind them, walls of black wind and pale fire scouring the land. But the mountains absorbed the sound, muted it, swallowed it whole. It was almost quiet. The silence frightened him more than the thunder. They had been walking for days, though days meant little under the fractured sky. The black veil had torn and closed again, cycling between void and storm, leaving them disoriented. Sometimes lightning was their only measure of time, sometimes nothing at all. The woman's limp worsened, her ankle swelling despite his efforts to bind it tighter. He had begun carrying her for stretches, pack shifted forward, her arms looped weakly around his shoulders. Every time she whispered for him to set her down, he ignored her. Now, at the base of the mountain wall, she lifted her head weakly and said, "It feels wrong." "What does?" "Everything. Quiet isn't natural anymore." He couldn't argue. His own heart was hammering in the silence. The world without storm felt like the breath held before drowning. They followed a dry gulch upward, winding into the ridges. The rock faces loomed, scored by centuries of lightning strikes. Whole slabs glittered with fused glass. When he touched one, it was cold and slick, like frozen tears. As they climbed, he noticed signs. Stacked stones that weren't natural, walls reinforced with rusted scrap, pits covered by rotting canvas. Someone had lived here once. Maybe still did. The woman noticed, too. "Do you think—" He didn't let her finish. Maybe. The word was all they had. By the third climb, they were both trembling. He could barely catch his breath. His shoulders screamed. Her weight was nothing, but the miles turned it into chains. Still, they kept climbing. And then, as the gulch narrowed, they found it. A wall of steel bolted into the rock itself, seamless except for a single door at the center. The door was massive, taller than a truck, wide as a bunker entrance, its surface scored by storms, but intact. At its center, a wheel lock, dull with rust. Above it, scrawled in faded paint, were words half erased. Sanctuary 17. The woman made a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. She reached out with trembling fingers, touching the metal as if afraid it would vanish. "Real," she whispered. "It's real." He didn't answer. His throat was too tight. It took everything he had to spin the wheel. His palms bled against the rust. The lock groaned, screamed, but finally turned. The door shifted inward with a sound like mountains moving. A draft of stale air wafted out, Carrie's scurrying dust and something faintly chemical. Inside, darkness. Not the black sky's living void, but man-made darkness. Enclosed, contained. He looked at her. She nodded once. They stepped inside. The air was heavy, stale but breathable. Their footsteps echoed down a corridor carved into stone. Bare bulbs dangled overhead, most shattered, a few flickering with faint yellow light. It was a bunker. Doors lined the hall, some twisted open, others sealed. Inside the open ones he glimpsed bunks, rusted cots, water tanks long dry. "People lived here," she murmured, running a hand along the wall. "Not anymore." The emptiness pressed down on them. Their voices felt intrusive, bouncing too loudly. Then they reached the chamber, at the heart of it. Rows of machines lined the walls, generators, filtration units, storage racks. Most were silent, but a few lights still glowed on their panels, faint green indicators winking in the dark. At the far end stood a table, and on the table a binder sealed in cracked plastic. He opened it with shaking hands. The pages were warped with damp, but the writing was legible. Sanctuary Project, Rasa. Log 17. The entries blurred before his eyes as he scanned. Population, 312. Supplies dwindling faster than expected. Storm debris compromised intake system. Radiation levels rising. Fights breaking out. Leadership fractured. Last transmission from 19 says they sealed themselves in. No response after. We are down to 40, children included. We can't hold. The last page was smeared with something brown-red. The final entry was just one word. Gone. He closed the binder slowly. The woman's face was pale, eyes wide but unreadable. "So it's not safe?" "No," he said hoarsely, "but it's shelter." They explored further. The dorms were abandoned but intact. The storage rooms had been stripped, but a few cans remained, rusted but sealed. Water trickled faintly from one pipe, enough to cup in their palms. It wasn't paradise. It wasn't salvation. But it was walls, a roof, a door that closed. For the first time in years, they weren't exposed. That night, they sat in the dorm with their packs emptied around them. He had coaxed a tiny flame to life. In an old tin, feeding it shreds of cloth. The glow cast their faces in trembling light. The woman broke open one of the cans. Beans, mushy and sour but edible. They ate in silence, savoring each bite as though it were sacred. When they were done, she leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed. "Do you think we could stay here?" He stared at the flame, listening to the hum of the generators, faint but steady. "For a while," he said. "Long enough?" He didn't answer. Later, as she slept curled against the wall, he wandered back to the main chamber. He placed his hand on the cold steel of the door. Outside he could hear it. The storm howling against the mountain, wind clawing at stone, lightning crashing like hammers. The world was still ending, piece by piece. But here, behind this door, he could almost pretend otherwise. He returned to her, sitting beside her sleeping form. For a long time, he watched her breathe, chest rising and falling, fragile but steady. She was the reason he was still alive, the reason he hadn't lain down and let the storms take him, the reason he had carried on when silence was worse than thunder. Tomorrow, they would decide. Search the rest of the bunker. See if the generators could last. Try to make this hollow grave into a home. But tonight, they had something more valuable than safety. They had rest. He closed his eyes, listening to the distant roar, and let himself believe in the smallest of mercies, that for once, the storm was on the other side of the door.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay safe.